Well, it's time for a few more comments and observations regarding police reform. Now, what's going to happen, I believe, is that throughout the country there's going to be committees formed and they're going to make some recommendations, and there'll be a little bit of a press fight, and they'll apply a few band-aids which may or may not work for a while, and they'll give sensitivity training to police, which we tried in Chicago once before the '68 convention, and a few other band-aids. But nobody's willing to address the root causes or the root problems. Now, they have various names for it, some of which is institutional racism. That's the main buzzword right now. And it's not institutional racism. That is a manifestation of class differentiation. It just is that most minorities are also in the lower classes. So it's easy to label class consciousness and class differentiation as being racial or ethnic in manifestation rather than, or causation rather than something a little more accurate. So we go clear back to the Nixon administration. You had one of the first significant things was the Omnibus Crime and Safe Streets Act. Well, there was a lot of protesting then, and you had the Chicago Convention where the police knocked the shit out of a lot of protesters, and the press was on it, and a lot of people were on it, and Nixon said he was going to maintain law and order. In other words, we're going to stop the riots, we're going to stop these uppity blacks from asserting themselves, and also teach those damn commie kids a lesson that when the power structure of the United States says, let's go rip off another third world country, that we do it. And if you don't want to participate, we'll throw your asses in jail, which was pretty much what happened. I remember a famous quote by a boxer who changed his name from from Cassius Clay to Muhammad Ali when he wouldn't be drafted or refused the draft. And he said, ain't no South Vietnamese ever attacked me or beat me up. It was generally the white people that did that, particularly down south. So he had a point that a lot of people never really talked about, and I think a lot of people missed. But, why should he go risk his life killing people that didn't harm him when he was harmed by his own people? And anyway, one of the first things Nixon did was push through a thing called the Omnibus Crime and Safe Streets Act. Now, what they did, according to a couple studies, and if you hold on, I guess I won't either. Hold on here. I'll bring that up on my other machine and see if I can get it. Anyway, there's a citation, and it said that the government went through all kinds of hang on here. If I go away from my machine, it goes into this other mode, my other machine, and then you got to sign in again and all that bullshit. It's a pain in the ass. Okay, here it is. And this is from the National Criminal Justice Reference Service. And it's an abstract, actually. And it was written from an article by a guy named Albanese. And it is in the www.ncirs.gov/app/abstract.aspx ? ID equals 79835. And it explains what happened there. And here's an interesting quote about the 1968 crime bill. It says that it allowed federal law enforcement to wiretap phones and eavesdrop, and really broadened that, which was has been in contention since 1928. And it said that the what was it? The DOJ, Department of Justice, made a concerted effort to develop support for wiretapping on the basis that it was an indispensable tool in law enforcement and that adequate procedural safeguards would be established. And a survey of the literature then said that the articles doubled the previous 2 years period in order to get the bill going or get it passed. And it gave this president all kinds of discretionary powers. And there are many unresolved issues that were put in footnotes. So we have a propaganda war going on. The Nixon administration, with its little kitchen cabinet, decided to get the Omnibus Crime and Safe Streets Act passed. They doubled the publications, the articles on crime, wiretapping, and things like this, in a propaganda effort. And one interesting thing is that a lot of the kitchen cabinet that Nixon had were PR people, even though they had law degrees, worked for Hill and Knowlton, which was a public relations firm, rather than governmental firm. So it was when they really started, I think, a large-scale propaganda campaign against the citizenry to bring about this emergent police state tactics. One of the big things that happened is I was appointed to a committee by under Health, Education, and Welfare, Johnson's administration, to work with Dr. Burr in an organization for drug abuse control, and we were trying to study, we had a staff and everything, we were studying ways of making standardization for drug treatment and addiction, things such as this. Like I said, we were funded under HEW, Health, Education, and Welfare. Nixon administration came along and decided this shouldn't be a medical problem, and with the stroke of a pen at the same time of the founding of the Law Enforcement Assistance Agency under the Omnibus Crime and Safe Streets Act, he made drug possession and drug use a crime rather than a health problem. And it got to the point where within 2 decades, a significant percentage of some statisticians say 80% of the jail population or crime population were drug cases. So a curious thing was going on at that time. We were gearing up in Vietnam rather than calming down. All the protests that were about Vietnam prior to the Nixon administration, the main effect was that it added substance to Nixon's argument that we needed more law and order, we needed to crack down more, and essentially get these long-haired hippie commies off the street. And they started identifying hair with political dissidents and hair with drugs, and tied them all together, scared the hell out of the population, and got the Omnibus Safe Streets Act passed. And by criminalizing drug abuse, they were able to create a really good propaganda basis for enlarging our police force and turning into a police state. That's why it went from about 300,000 prisoners when I started practicing law to at this time close to 5 to 7,000, depending on the time period. I've got here a King's College report, University of London, on the world prison population list. And what it says here, there are 9.8 million people held in penal institutions throughout the world, mostly as pretrial detainees. Half of these are in the United States. Another almost million are held in administrative detention in China and other places. Here is a quote again from the London source. The United States has the highest prison population in the world. 756 people per 100,000. Followed by Russia, followed by Rwanda, Cuba, Belarus, Belize, Bahamas, Georgia, Grenada. Three-fifths of the countries in the world have rates below 150 per 100,000. So we're ahead of the lock 'em up race more than just about any other country. So there's all kinds of charts here with data of every country in the world that is comparison to ours. And it's scary because other countries try to see what they can do to help people. They look at causation. I remember I had a case in Mexico City several years ago, and I went to see my client in the Reclusorio Norte, the North Prison. And I looked around in there, and there were couples, husbands and wives, and kids playing on swings and teeter-totters, and they were like picnicking in the central grounds. So I talked to the warden about this, and he kind of put me down, and I explained that I was a criminologist and also a lawyer, and I was interested in what he was doing there. And he looked at me and he says, you Americans are so self-righteous and look down upon us for what we do, and our research is, what we do here is based on research coming out of your country. These men are going to be in prison a little time, but sooner or later they're going to have to get out into the community. And we want them to be integrated with their families and build a support group rather than getting into the crime mode that brought them here. He says, you think we're backward. You think we're stupid. You call us names. You look down upon us. But at least we don't disregard our own research like you people do. And I think that's something we ought to consider. Now, we've got all this research and they're ignoring it. And when you hear people talk about reform, or how we're going to reform this, or how we're going to reform that, ask them what research they've read that they're basing these decisions on. Ask them what the model is. Is it a safety model? Is it a reformation model? Or is it a lock 'em up model? Why do we need preventive detention? Who decides somebody should be detained? Who decides that the person is a risk? Well, some of that can be done pretty well by looking at the demographics and sociological bases. People with support groups generally have less chance of being recidivists. But that isn't what they look at. You have judges, for instance, saying somebody with a lid of marijuana is people like you that are causing a great crime, and no matter what, you're contributing to a system that is killing people. And these assholes ignore the fact that the main perpetrator of drugs and drug crimes is the American government through their CIA. So they bring the drugs in, they make it illegal, keeping the price up, and then they get dumbass judges to put people in prison so that the prices are maintained, and the propaganda effect enlarges their power, and it's a round robin. And who benefits? Well, generally the corporate leaders of the Americas. They sell privatization and bureaucratization, and what they really are doing is replacing trained professionals that were trained with the curricula of the 50s, 60s, and 70s with minimum wage employees who know better than to knock the shit out of people, because they don't have any other communication skills or any other skills to deal with things that they don't understand, and many of them don't care about understanding. So this is the situation we're in, and let them go ahead and make these cosmetic reforms, but be aware that there are a lot more things they could do, and that we ought to be getting to the basis. We ought to be studying causation rather than methodology. Have a good 4th.